Today is the 27th day of Sivan, the 3rd of July, and we're continuing with chapter 2 of Shoresh Mitzvat Tefillah, the root of the mitzvah to pray. And just to recap yesterday, so we saw that prayer, first of all, he says, is equal for everyone when it comes to personal needs. Everybody has a right and probably a duty to pray. And he said that the duty from the Torah is to pray when you need to. From the sages, it became that you have to daven 3 times a day and say these particular words. But from the Torah, it means that you need to turn to God whenever you have any kind of need. So somebody wrote that this everybody agrees, that you turn to God when you have some kind of need. Okay, could be that everybody agrees. But what not everybody agrees is, of course, what I mean by everybody, I mean outside of Yiddishkeit, outside of Judaism, that you need to pray 3 times a day, and these are the words that need to be said 3 times a day. But now when it comes to turning to God, what's the purpose in that? So here he told us that the purpose really is to ingrain in our minds that there is no power but Him. And that's the real reason, or the reasoning behind the mitzvah of the Torah, which is to turn to God whenever you have need. But like he says, it could be that you'll be answered in the negative. Meaning everybody has a right to request, but it doesn't mean that necessarily things will be heard.
What they want.
Right.
Correct? I mean, there's a fine nekudah there.
Right. So this is about prayer. There are other means, there are other faculties and things that we do that build the relationship between man and God on a different footing. We're not going to get into that. That's related to the question of what it means to have trust in God. To have trust in God is a completely different faculty. It's not necessarily simply a mitzvah from the Torah, but it is one of the things that one might say is the foundation of Judaism, because it's what God demanded from Abraham, that he walk before him and be whole. And walking before him means having trust, that the way that I'm following, God will make happen, meaning that those things that I want to achieve in my service, in my mission in life, God will assist me in making it happen. But that's a different topic altogether. Now we're in chapter 2. Okay. By the way, an adjunct to everything that we saw, I didn't mention this yesterday, is that the definition, therefore, of idolatry is turning to anything but God when asking for our needs. So idolatry is not necessarily an idol. It could be anything that I turn to. If I turn to my money, if I turn to whatever it is. Okay. Chapter 2. In order to understand a little bit more the prayer that we pray, now we're talking about the way that we pray it, not just what the Torah dictates, but how the sages taught us to pray. So now we're getting into the mitzvah from the point of view of the sages, not from the Torah. So, as is his style here, he always turns to the Kabbalistic explanation first. And the Kabbalistic explanation is brought in a book called Kriyas Chaim. This is an anthology of the Arizal's teachings on the yearly cycle. So it goes through everything, and it also has a large section on prayer. The ההפרש בין קריאת שמע לתפילה הוא שעל ידי קריאת שמע נעשה ייחוד אבא ואמא, ועל ידי תפילה נעשה ייחוד הזון. So we have 2 major parts in our daily prayer. In the morning, Kriyas Shema, reading the Shema, which is a mitzvah from the Torah, which the sages inserted into our davening. And davening. Davening itself is the Amidah, the 18-19 benedictions. And says there in the Arizal that by Kriyat Shema, by reading the Shema, we create a unification in what's known as Abba and Ima, meaning in the intellect, the intellectual partzufim, father and mother. Validate Tfilah, and by the Amidah, we create a unification in Ze'er and Pin and Nukva, in the emotions and kingdom. Okay? ולפי שייחוד האבא ואמא הוא נעלה יותר, לכן מצוות קריאת שמע גדולה יותר. And because the unification of Abba and Ima of the intellect is more supernal, therefore the mitzvah to read Shema is greater than the mitzvah to pray. Okay. How do we see this? Halachically, that even a person who spends all his time, his work, his profession is learning Torah, he has to stop in order to say Kriyat Shema. Today nobody uses this. It's not something that we do halachically, but in the time of the Mishnah there were people like this, that their work, their profession was to learn, therefore they only stopped in order to say Kriyat Shema. They put their hand over their eyes, they say Kriyat Shema, and they were done. They did not pray. Then there were those who prayed once every 30 days, like Rabbi Yehuda. There was different levels on this. Still, still there is something higher about the Amidah, because it's called Amidah, we stand. And when we say the Kriyat Shema, we sit. Why is this? Because when we say the Amidah, we're in the highest world, called emanation. And in emanation, Atzilus, there is no sitting down. There you have to stand. But in Kriyat Shema, we sit down because we are still in the world of creation, right? So the worlds are action, formation, creation, and emanation. Asiyah, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilut. So in Kriyat Shema, we're sitting down, and even though it's a mitzvah, we're sitting down, which is very interesting in and of itself, because when we take a lulav, for instance, we take the 4 species, we stand up. How do we know that we're supposed to sit down when we... it's from the verses themselves. Okay?
Yeah, right.
Kederech she'adam koreh. In the way that you usually read. So since people today read when they sit down, so we sit down when we read it. Ki en banu koach. So he says, what is going on here? That there's a switch here, because we said the Kriyat Shema is higher, so why are we sitting down? And we're still in the world of creation. But it's the unification of Abba and Ima. Abba and Ima in general, the intellect is generally associated with the world of emanation, when it's both of them together. If it's just Bina, if it's just understanding, Ima, then we would say it's just creation. But when it's Abba and Ima, when you say them together, the Yichud, the unification of them, that's almost always in the world of emanation. So, how could it be that we sit down, we're in creation, and we're affecting a unification and emanation above us? And when we're in the Amidah, we're standing up, we're in the world of emanation, but we can only affect a unification in the emotions and the kingdom. So that doesn't seem to make sense. But this all has to do with the relativity of Kabbalah, meaning everything is relative. So when we say that we are affecting a unification in the intellect, when we sit and say Kriyat Shema, it's true, we're doing it in the emanation. But we ourselves are still in creation. So, how does this work, he says? כי אין בנו כוח לעורר הייחוד האבא ואמא בהיותנו באצילות, אך ורק בהיותנו בבריאה. We don't have the strength to affect the unification of the intellect when we're in the world of emanation. We can only do it when we're in the world of creation. What would this be like? It would be like a person who's a great teacher, but only for older people. But if he has to deal with children, he's not so entertaining. He's not so good. So it's actually when he's in, or to give a better example, someone who's a great orator, like he gives great speeches, but only if it's a small crowd, 50 people. Get him in front of 500 people, 1,000 people, 2,000 people, he clams up. He can't perform. It just doesn't work. So we're the same way. We affect the unification, we do it properly, but only when we're in the creation. But we're doing it in emanation. That's where the unification is happening. ובבחינת הבריאה נקרא מושבותיכם, כמו שכתוב בפירוש מושבותיכם תביאו לחם תנופה. And this is called sitting down. Bria is the world of sitting down. Sometimes it's even called the world of the throne. Olam HaKiseh. Why is it called the world of the throne? We talked about this a long time ago, you probably don't remember. We said that God sits on his throne as the ruler, the controller of reality. He's like a king controlling his kingdom, his realm. That way, the world of creation is understood as the place from which the rules of nature come from, the causal rules of nature. From here, God runs the show. So we call it the world of the throne. It's like where he's sitting down. This was the early imagery before Kabbalah, before the Kabbalah of the Arizal that talked about, or even before the Zohar. In the Zohar, it's also sometimes called the world of the throne, but this is really from ancient Kabbalah, from much earlier times. And again, that was the image. Before we explain what it means to unify the emotions and kingdom, so now he gives us a very technical note, which is important to understand. You already know this. We won't say anything new, except for maybe I made you a little chart. We'll see if it adds something. Because whenever we talk about Kabbalah, the problem is that it's very easy to fall into anthropomorphism.
Yeah, sure.
So we want to, first of all, explain that these are all metaphors and parables. דיני מלבד ההפשטה הידוע לכל, שכל מה שדיברו המקובלים וכינו לאלוקות יתברר בערכי הכינויים הגשמיים, all the connotations that the Kabbalists gave God, כמו ראש וידיים, that he has a head and hands and feet. It's not just the Kabbalists, the Torah also. ודומהן, all these body parts, הכל משל ומליצה. ומקרא מילה כתיב כי לא ראיתם כל תמונה, כמו שמבואר באידרא רבא. So all these are only parables, they're metaphors. And the Torah says this clearly. It says, when God appeared at Sinai, you saw no picture. There was no picture. And as explained in the Idra Rabbah, one of the most important parts of the Zohar, is called the Great Assembly. But rather, these are supernal divine powers in the sense of like you would say, like the electromagnetic force. Something like that. They're not physical. You can't call an electron is not a thing. It's a force. So there are forces, and these, from them, they are the source of the coming into being of the physical things we see in this world. Meaning that this is not even God himself. Because God, as Maimonides says, he's not a force, he's not a body, he's not a force in the body. He's neither. But here we have forces. The God created these forces, either we'll see the Sfirot, and they themselves, they are the source for everything physical that comes here, but only after a long process of coming down. In the same way that if I would tell somebody this is made out of electrons, and electrons are not things, I don't understand what you mean. This is a great metaphor. It's a great metaphor. I say like because it's not the same thing, but it's very similar. I'm not saying that the powers of God are the electromagnetic force. I'm just saying that the way that we understand today the electromagnetic force being 99% of the interactions that we have in the physical world, these are a great example for what it means that a sphere is the source of the physical world, as explained by the Shla. And the Shla has a very important piece in the beginning of his book, the Shnei Luchot Brit, in something called Bait Ne'eman, is a section. And there he explains what it means, this thing that we call ishtalshalus, this descent of forces into becoming physical objects. But the point is that when we say God's hand, we mean that why do we call it God's hand in the end? Because in the end, that is the source of what it means to have, let's say it's the right hand, it's chesed. That's the source of what in the end is my hand. My hand embodies something of that force. It's a descendant of that force. וגם לפי שמהותם ועניינם למעלה ברוחניות באלוקות לפעול דוגמת פעולת האיברים שבאדם. And because there is a similarity in the effect they have. That when I say God's hand, it has a similar effect to my hand. Meaning to bring something close, or to push it away, or to whatever I'm doing with it. שנקרא על שמם. That's why my hand is named after that, not the other way around. And this is a very important point, that the Torah is speaking in reverse.
Yes.
It's saying that the world that you see here is a product of the spiritual world, not the other way around. That needs to be discussed, because we've discussed this in the past. We've said that really physical matter is not a descendant of anything spiritual. Physical matter itself is a completely different creation. And in Chassidus we use two different languages to describe the coming into being of physical matter and the coming into being of forces. Forces, we say, are exactly what we just described. And this is called yesh mi yesh. Something from something, being from being. And it's a descent, and it slowly thickens, we call it. But when it comes to the physical matter in the universe, we don't call that seder ishtalshelut, not in the normal way anyway. We call it yesh me'ayin. We call it something or being from non-being, because there is a complete leap from there not being something physical to there being something physical. It's not a slow descent.
Yes.
So when I talk about my hand, what I'm really talking about is, again, like the chesed in my hand, the power in my hand to affect certain things. And I think with this we'll end today. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow. So hopefully we'll get to that tomorrow. Oh, yeah.